Hi everyone. Excuse me. I'm feeling a little under the weather, so Carol told me that I can send a video of my PowerPoint presentation, so that's what I'm going to do now. I emailed everyone my synthesis and my annotated bibliography, so you should have that. And I also submitted everything on Blackboard. So my project, this is Professional Nursing Practice Exemplar. My project research was regarding compassion fatigue and nurse burnout. Compassion fatigue, and how we can recognize it, change it, and different ways that we can achieve that. So, nurse compassion fatigue, according to the new Oxford American Dictionary, indifference to, it's a noun, indifference to charitable appeals on behalf of those who are suffering, experienced as a result of the frequency or number of such appeals. So basically, when you see and experience what we see and experience as nurses too frequently, or if considerations are not made for the nurse based on what they're experiencing, this is when we have compassion fatigue. So the synthesis of my research, what I found was nursing tenure and experience. Actually, nurses that are tenured and have more experience were the nurses that were able to work through compassion fatigue and actually had less compassion fatigue than the younger, less experienced nurses, which is one of the most shocking things that I found in my research. It's also setting specific, so ICUs, emergency departments, high acuity areas are areas where nurses have the most compassion fatigue, which makes sense. Nursing mindset, so how each nurse views what they're seeing, or if they have a prejudice about pain or narcotics, or what they think, how they think a family should act, or how they think a patient should act. Those nurses experience more compassion fatigue because they set an expectation about a situation before they actually walk into it. Nursing program curriculums, which I'll talk about after this slide again, but it's basically nursing program curriculums can incorporate ways for nurses, as they're learning to become nurses, to cope and deal with compassion fatigue. So proposition of change. Changes should be based on the research. Evidence-based practice is what we base all of our practice on. So research should be the vehicle that causes the change. Additional education and nursing programs. So, the BSN and the ADN are well-rounded degrees. I think that there's more opportunity for BSN programs to incorporate the type of psych education required for nurses to understand what compassion fatigue is, and they can learn through their education how best ways to cope. But everyone's an individual, so everyone deals with stressors differently. So I just think that making students aware that this exists is step one in changing how nurses deal with issues like this. Setting specific education. So the research suggests that emergency departments, ICUs, etc., high acuity areas should have education on their respective units among nurses to discuss compassion fatigue and ways to work through it, which brings me to mindfulness training, which is what that that's what that would be. And then debriefings. Debriefings, I find, so the research suggests that debriefings will lessen compassion fatigue, and I agree with that. Working in the hospital, I have seen, debriefing is something that we talk about. It's something that we're supposed to be doing, but I find that we we rarely actually do it after codes, after a patient dies. We will discuss the situation among each other, but formal debriefings, I find, are something that management would like to see, but it's not something that actually happens. So incorporating debriefings, I believe, would help. Okay, so proposition of change again. Ideal change to improve compassion fatigue are as follows. This is my opinion. I do agree with the research that psychological education regarding compassion fatigue is necessary in nursing programs and site-specific settings. Nurses should be given time to discuss stressors in peer settings and be paid to do so. I think that part of the reason why debriefings are not happening is because there isn't any time, which I'll get to in a minute. I've talked in prior assignments about how the full-time nurse these days typically works, the full-time inpatient nurse typically works 36 hours. So there are 4 hours available per week to bring you to 40 hours to avoid overtime, because that's what all hospitals hate. I think that there can be much can be accomplished with the 4 remaining hours of the week, and I think that debriefing in street clothes, outside of an assignment, being paid to do so, will really be something that helps improve the situation. Units should be open to understanding each individual nurse and make accommodations during stressful times. An example would be, after the death of a patient, the RN may leave work with the rest of the shift paid, and or not get another admission or assignment after post-mortem care. The reason that I chose death is because I work in the NICU, and I've had patients die, and it's incredibly stressful, both because the patient died and because you're dealing with the family and everything that goes along with that. Not to mention, post-mortem care can take hours. It's incredibly, incredibly stressful for anyone to care for someone who's recently died, whether it be an adult or a baby. So I don't think that this is an outlandish request to have the hospital or have the institution pay for the rest of the shift, or, not just, you don't have another assignment the rest of the day. So the rest of your shift includes, understanding what happened. There's tons of documentation, there's tons of things that have to be done. And then after that, maybe you can serve as a resource for other nurses on the floor and just not have to take on another assignment. I don't in any way think that that's a crazy request, but I think that hospitals may feel differently. Barriers to change, these are the big hurdles, which we've talked about multiple times in different projects, but it's money, time, a strained medical system, and then hesitant, experienced nurses. So this brings me back to the nurses that are tenured and the nurses that have more experience. This is the population that feels fatigue of care less than the younger, less experienced nurses, and this is according to the research. So, although I personally don't think that more experienced nurses would have a problem with the changes that could be made to help compassion fatigue, but they would be the ones, I think, that if anyone had a problem, I think it would be this population of nurses. Facilitators to the change. Nurses in settings where burnout is high. Higher level educational institutions. Nurses in settings where burnout is high, I believe, could be facilitators to change, because those are the nurses that need it the most. Higher level education institutions, meaning incorporating, as I've mentioned, compassion fatigue education into nursing programs. Nursing leadership, hospital CFOs, this kind of goes together. Nursing leadership, management really are the ones that make decisions about whether or not we should have nurses come in for the remaining 4 hours of the week for things like this, or they decide where budgetary things basically is what it comes down to, and that's where nursing leadership comes in. They are really the vehicles. Hospital CFOs, I feel like if nursing got the respect that it deserved, then hospital CFOs would understand that, money money has to go into this, because money is really how things happen. So it's really, hospital financial or institutional financial management needs to be educated on the subject, and quite frankly, they have to care about it, because if they don't, we won't get the money that we need. And registered nurse peers, like I said before, everyone is an individual, everyone is different. Not everyone is going to experience compassion fatigue the same way, but I feel like if everyone's aware that it's happening, nursing leadership makes it a priority, then registered nurses together will recognize it and help one another, ideally. Identified champions for change. I put APRNs, specifically psychiatric mental health nurse practitioners. They can be called in to run and lead groups of nurses that need counseling and need help with compassion fatigue. Nurse researchers are champions because they're the reason I'm sitting here discussing it. So because of nurse research, I'm doing this. We have this topic, we have the research, it's evidence-based. Authors of the literature are the people that actually do complete the research. Registered nurses with firsthand experience and self-help interventions, both in inpatient and community settings. There are nurses that are specifically trained and do education in topics like this and help to facilitate groups as well. Nurse health coaches. I came across nurse health coaches in my research because they actually are nurses that are trained to basically they are trained to educate the general population and other nurses on overall wellness and health. So I threw them in there. Evaluation of the change. Evaluation should be completed pre and post whatever change is made in whatever setting to help improve compassion fatigue. Professional quality of life scale and secondary traumatic stress score. So professional quality of life scale it's a measure intended to provide practitioners and researchers with an indication of a caring professional's compassion satisfaction, burnout, and secondary traumatic stress. So that's what that is. And then secondary traumatic stress score. These scores are, they're identified as emotional duress that results when an individual hears about firsthand trauma experiences of another. So this actually mimics post-traumatic stress disorder. And there's a continuum on how we measure someone's secondary score. And an example of that, because I know it's a little confusing, would be how you are on a floor where you witness a nurse go through hours of emotional duress with postmortem care or something like that, and how you feel witnessing it is basically what that means. It's secondary traumatic. It's secondary trauma. And my final thoughts, as the patient population becomes older and sicker, society will significantly need more nurses, especially in Maine. These RNs should be equipped with the coping skills and self-help strategies required to prevent compassion fatigue. A more compassionate business structure that better represents the caring nature of the nursing profession. So this goes back to the CFOs and people making the major financial decisions. And that's my references page. In closing, I'm very upset that I wasn't able to come to class today. I hope that everyone liked my project, and Carol told me that we have one more wiki, so I will be talking with just Juanita next week, but I wish everybody well, and I hope that I'm sorry that I missed your projects, and I hope that everyone enjoyed their final day of class. And Carol, if you need anything else from me regarding the project, please reach out and let me know. And I hope everyone has a good day. Thank you.